welcome you all to Trek Wars.
Today on Trek Wars, we're going to take a trip back in time and we're going to learn about the different ships of the Kirk era and the Klingon Empire. We'll learn about the ship's stats, we'll learn about their abilities, and then we'll learn about the ship dynamics and fleet operations of the Klingon Empire during the era of Kirk. With that being said, engage. Okay, so the most important ship that we're going to speak about in the first ship will obviously be the Klingon D7, which is the most advanced ship of the Klingon fleet that is mass-produced. The D7 design, developed from the earlier D4, has long been a popular vessel within the Klingon commanders and crew due to its high performance standards and reliability, and it's easy to repair and it has incredibly good strike capabilities. So the D7 class AM Katanga display is a modified version of the D7. So the D7 is capable of carrying 6,000 metric tons of cargo, it has 5 shuttlecrafts, it can carry up to 220 troops, has a crew of 352. Now, the original D7 does not have a photon torpedo launcher and is equipped with only 4 disruptors. So when we look at the comparative analysis to the Katanga, we know that the upgraded Katanga has stronger weapons and it also has 6 disruptors as well as 2 photon torpedo tubes. Now, overall, I think that the hull strength of the two ships is going to be very similar, because I do think the D7 and the Katanga, as far as the hull and the shielding, are probably going to be around the same, because they're at that time period, it's the most advanced ship they have. When the Katanga does come around, the Katanga is using things that are already there that have become standardized by the Klingon fleet. So the shield's around 325,000, the hull is probably around 540,000. So it gives a full defense of 865. The biggest difference between the Katanga and the D7 is the amount of firepower. And not to mention, newer reactors and more powerful reactors were inserted into the Katanga line. So it's a retrofit and it's just an improvement of an already improved ship. Alright, so one of the ships we should be talking about is the D4, the prequel to the D7. So the D4 Predator was probably one of the most common ships seen around the Klingon Empire, and a lot of engagements still had this ship. Now this ship nowhere had the firepower of the D7. It did have 5 disruptors, had a length of 205 meters, had a crew of 305, and had a mass of 4,301,460. Now it was capable of warp 7 and then had a maximum of warp 8. So on these scales, the ship is pretty quick, and this ship was one of the first ships that was built using more modern reactors and more modern warp speeds. So this is the first long-range attack ship that the Klingon Empire used. Now, due to some of the limitations in power outputs seen in older ships, this has 5 disruptors. But this would not have been the same 5 disruptors that you've seen on the D7. It would have probably been medium level disruptors, which I don't have any actual calculations for, but it wouldn't have been that far off. Maybe about half of what the disruptors are from the KD8s, which are seen on the D7s. So the D7s is 3,750. So I guess you could just divide that in half and you'd probably get a pretty accurate description of the ship's offensive capabilities. Alright, so the Predator class D4 doesn't have the firepower or the abilities of, obviously, the D7. So the Predator class has a length, obviously, of 205 meters, height 45, width 130, a weight of 84,600 metric tons, warp 7, warp 8, crew of 305. It has no troops or passengers on board. The D4 pioneered the non-standard command pod forward design. Having performed well, this class ship is now served in the reserve fleets. So what that means is the Predator class is going to be used as a substitution ship or a patrol ship. You know, it could be used in some of the squads, but it's an older ship. It is possible to have retrofitted it to put a torpedo tube, but most likely they're just going to keep this 5 standard disruptors. And the reason it's keeping those 5 standard disruptors is because the amount of time it would take to modify this ship probably isn't worth it to the Klingon Empire, and it's just a reserve fleet. It's just something that you're putting out there to give your enemy another target. It's very limited, but it is the pioneering, the future, you know, Klingon look that we go with the D7 and the Katanga, their main ships. This is the first ship to do it. Now, the last thing to note about this ship is you would not be sending these ships to engage Federation starships. Most likely minor races or rebellious Klingon colonies is where you're going to send a ship like this. If you're going to engage the Federation, they're an advanced race, we're going to send something like the D7. These ships are more of a reserve ship, but if you need the numbers, like I said, they're part of the reserve forces and the reserve army. Now you can tell that the ship is, you know, significantly smaller than the D7. It has a crew that's around the same as the D7 because of the lack of technology. This ship was the integration to new generations. Alright, so the last thing is the conversions between the manual and then the actual canon ships is significantly different. So everything that you see on screen is going to be what the ships would be in the canon universe, rather than the game manual, which we're getting a lot of our data from. So that's why when we read it off, you'll see things that are controversial and they're wrong. So obviously the mass of 431,460 is several times larger than what I just stated to you guys. So I just want you guys to be aware of that. The manual will say something we slightly off, and I'll give you guys that information, and then I'll show you the conversions, what I've done with the formulas. And with that being said, let's move on to the D3. All right, so now we're going to talk about the D3. So the D3 was the first generation ship that went from fusion reactors to warp reactors, and they had a lot of issues with these ships. They were never built originally for, you know, standard warp engines, so they're very limited. They can only go from warp 2 to warp 3. It has 6 fighters aboard and it has a crew of 350. The D3, like I said, is the old generation of fusion reactors and then your warp cores. Many of these ships exploded while going into warp speeds. They were very, very unstable and were only seen around Klingon main space. So, due to the limitations, they carried only 2 disruptors and missiles. They didn't even have photon torpedoes. They just had missiles and 2 disruptors. Now, like I said, these disruptors are probably a lower yield than that seen on the D7. We don't really know what they are. I would guess that these are probably light disruptors or medium disruptors, as the standard Klingon disruptors on the D7 would be considered heavy disruptors. Now, some interesting things about this ship is this. They did have a significant amount of these ships because, like I said, this is the first generation going from fusion to warp cores. So once they did get the technology more stable, they did have quite a few of these ships left. Like I said, they were never really able to do anything with the slowness of the ship, so what they ended up doing is they added a module to the ship. The original variants of these ships never had this module underneath that was carrying 6 fighters. What they started using these ships for is they would be escorted by typically scouts, and the scout ships would, you know, defend them because they're so slow. When the cruisers and the squads are going and attacking the enemy, once they've destroyed the enemy, these ships will come in when they need to do planetary engagements. So what's going to happen is those fighters or those shuttlecrafts that are on that pod will be delivered to the surface to give support to the ground forces. Now, one of the things that I speculate about this ship, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, so we'll take this with a grain of salt. Now that they made this module, and we do know that Klingons have tanks and other vehicles during this time period, and that was a common warfare. Most of the time when they talk about ground forces deploying in atmosphere, they're using the bird of prey. I think this ship might be able to enter atmosphere, and the ship would take this module and would drop it off, and the module might be full of vehicles and troops. Now, that's just a speculation, but even if it's not, it's going to be used as a support vessel for troop on the ground. So that's really its only primary use, is bringing those fighters to go into atmosphere or to bring large amounts of troops who are carried in the module. The ship doesn't have very good armor. Its shielding is poor. Its weapon systems are poor. It is not designed to engage enemy ships during the Kirk era. It's just so old. It's just not really designed for that. It's more of a secondary supply ship or cargo ship, one of those things. It's used for logistics. Alright, so now we're going to talk about one of the most important ships in the Klingon Empire during this time period. So that would be the T3 assault ship. So it has a length of 250 meters, it's capable of warp 7, and it has a maximum of warp 8. It has a crew of 62, troops 800. Okay, and it's 376,380 metric tons, and it has 8 disruptors. So the T3 transport ship has a lot of firepower. It's a more modern ship, and it's fast, and it has automation on it. It's a newer ship, and it's a fantastic ship for engaging planets. This ship is extremely valuable to the Klingon Empire because of the massive amount of troops on it. It is not fighting in the front lines. It's capable of defending itself, but it's not really ever going to be in the front lines. This ship shows up after the cruisers have done their job, and then this ship is going to bring massive amounts of troops to a planetary surface. Okay, so the T3 assault ship is the main ship associated with occupational forces, which are used to take over minor races or other enemy targets, obviously for planetary engagement. So the occupational force is a fleet-sized organization of vessels under the command of a naval admiral, but carrying marines to a planetary engagement, who upon landing and control of the planet will fall under the command of the marine planetary governor. Depending on the need of the operation, an occupational force can make up the following vessels: one or more assault ship to carry the occupational force necessary to mop up operations, transport ships to carry supplies sufficient to at least a length engagement, 2 scout ships vessels for a command privilege, a number of K-22 scouts for atmosphere recon and planetary strafing, a squad escort vessels to protect the assault ship. A gunboat will also be carried to the engagement, but will be held in reserve for actions needed after the occupational force have left. So, what does this all mean? So basically what you're going to see is that first ship is the assault ship, the T3, that the occupational commander will be. There'll be a squad, which is going to consist of 3 ships, which will be cruisers, which I'm showing here as D4s. The assault ship that the commander is on at the top will be always protected by at least 2 K-15 scout ships, and there will be 2 more additional scout ships, which would be the K-22s, which will be used to support ground forces. Now, I didn't add the transport ships because obviously the T3 itself is the transport ship. Now, there will be a possible other ship lagging along behind this, which would be, the D3 light carrier that we were talking about. When they're referring to, if needed, an assault ship or gunboat, that's basically what the D3 light carrier is it's carrying all those fighters if it's necessary. So the occupational force will show up here. The birds of prey are going to blow the crap out of all the major defenses. And then once this is all done, the plant's been taken over, the D3 light carrier is going to show up. It's going to have its little fighters, and it's going to have an occupational force that will maintain order. So that's how occupational forces work with the Klingon Empire. Okay, so most of you guys have seen my videos already about the Klingon Burrell, or the Klingon scout ship. So we're not going to go too much detail into this, but we'll talk about some of the other scout ships, right? So obviously, the K-15 Scout is probably the one you guys are probably not familiar with. It's a length of 110 meters. Its crew is 126. It has a mass of 250,000. It's capable of warp 7, and it's capable of warp 8, and it has 4 disruptors. Now, this is a more modern starship, extensively used in all Empire territories as well as frontier areas, well accepted by officers of the Klingon Empire. So that's what the official stance is. K-15 Unseen Creeper class scout ship. So what this scout ship is it's basically a cheaper variant of the bird of prey. It's got more firepower. It's got twice the firepower. It's going to be larger, more armored than the bird of prey, and it's fast. So it's basically just to protect transport ships, is what the scout ship there, or it's going to be using patrol duty. It's a really common ship in the Klingon Empire. Now, the Klingon bird of prey is obviously a more advanced starship than the K-15. When it comes to, it only takes a handful, 14 people to run a Klingon Burrell. It's got a lot of automation. It's an expensive advanced ship. It's got a cloaking device. The K-15 has no cloaking device. It's a modern, cheap budget starship. It's got good stats, for a ship of its size. So it's gonna use pretty common, or it's gonna be a pretty common ship seen during the Klingon time periods. Now, there is another scout ship that is involved in the Klingon Empire, which would be the Nakul Dawul, which I don't even know how to say this right. It's a small scout ship. It's basically trash. I'm not even going to say a whole lot about it. It has like 1 disruptor. It can enter the atmosphere, and it has 1 disruptor. So it could be used, but any actual real force that you want to exude, you're going to be using the Burrell, because the K-15 can't enter atmosphere. That's real important. It can only fight in space. That's one of the really advanced things about the bird of prey, is it can enter atmosphere. Makes you a very versatile weapon. Now we're going to talk about the most uncommon ships that you would ever see in the Klingon Empire, and that would be the battleships. The L-24 Ever Victorious has 12 disruptors and 4 torpedoes. 320 meters, has a mass of 1,091,400, has a crew of 1,070, troops 480. It's capable of warp 6 and a maximum of 8. So, a ship like this ship is powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with the Constitution class. It would be able to take it out. This ship was designed to engage Excelsior class starships, or at least that's what the idea is. Now, to be all honest, at 320 meters, the weight is very similar to a Constitution class. This ship isn't quite hitting the Excelsior class like stats. And the reason it's not is Klingon technology had took a significant dive compared to the Federation during this time period. Now, this ship could easily destroy a Constitution class. It's about the same size, its weight, it weighs more, it's about half the weight of an Excelsior. But that's some power, that's a lot of disruptors, it's a lot of torpedoes. This ship is what's going to be, your commander is going to be in a fleet logistics scenario. So if there was ever an invasion on Federation territory, this is the ship that would be controlling a Klingon fleet. And we'll go over what a Klingon fleet is right now. Alright, a Klingon fleet is a short duration grouping of vessels for inflicting maximum damage with a limited engagement, made up of the following: 2 L-13 battleships, 2 squads of cruisers, any class of combination of 2 squads of destroyers, any class of combination, 1 squad of frigates, 2 escort vessels per squad, a complement of 6 scouts and 2 monitors to be included, enough transports to carry supplies for an engagement of up to 2 months duration. Responsibility lies in the making of crippling attacks on major strongholds and or infamous running dog attacks against enemy fleets of less strength. So, a Klingon fleet does not want to engage something of the same caliber. It wants to hit targets weaker than itself, overwhelm it, and destroy it. So an occupational force is not going to attack the Federation. If they're going to attack the Federation, or let's say a major power, they're going to use a fleet. And that fleet is going to have 2 scout ships in front of it, as you see, and those scout ships will figure out what is out there, use their cloaking devices. Once they come in, there will be those 2 squads of cruisers, which will be your D7s. Behind the D7s is those battleships. Between the battleships is going to the next layer, which is going to be the destroyers. So the D4s are going to be the role of the destroyers, and they're guarding the assault ships, your supply ships, the T3s. Now, beneath them is going to be those scout ships, those K-15s. 3 K-15s are going to guard each one of the light cruisers. Now, why is that? Because you want to get in there, you want to hit the enemy forces, you want to hit them hard, you want those cruisers to take out what they can. If something does start going, because if you're being in a situation with planetary bombardment, your primary targets are going to be those troops. You want to take those T3 assault ships out, and you're going to want to hit those light carriers, right? The D3s, because that's where most of your troops are coming from. Very few of them are going to be coming from the D7s, and next to nothing is coming from your predators. So your issues are those ships. Now, they're very well protected, and it's going to be very hard to get to them because you got to go through the cruisers, then you got to go through the battleships, and then you have to go through the destroyers, and then if you manage to get past the T3s, because they're not helpless, they have a decent amount of firepower in them, then you have to engage scouts, because there are going to be raiders, and they're going to be faster ships and cruisers that are going to get into here and are going to get and try to go after them. So they're always going to be protected. Because if you lose your ground forces, well, then you can't take the planet. It's pretty simple. And just so we cover this again, a squad is the most common formation, and it's usually going to be 3 D7s. So when you want to attack an enemy target, Klingon ships don't typically operate by themselves. They are usually in groups of 3. Because their ships are inferior to the Federation, and they know that. And so when they're going to engage enemy ships, they are counting on numbers. Now, the only exception to this is obviously the K-22, because it can cloak, and it usually operates on its own. But that ship is designed to infiltrate and spy. That's its main purpose. Alright, so a fleet. It's going to have 2 battleships. Then it's going to have 6 cruisers, 6 destroyers, 6 scouts, 3 frigates, 2 monitors, and 2 scout ships. That is the fleet dynamics. That is what they look like. So now that we have an understanding of the Klingon Empire and the ships they're using, let's look at one of the last ships before the destruction of Praxis. Alright, so probably the most advanced ship of this time period would be the Ravenous class battleship. It has 4 disruptor cannons and 5 photon torpedoes. It's around 320 meters. Its mass 1,091,400, crew 1,070, troops 480, warp 6 to 8. So it's very similar to the L-24 battleship, except for it has far less disruptors. And don't let that trick you, because these disruptors are very powerful. These disruptors are not the same disruptors seen on the L-24. These disruptors are designed to attack planetary structures, and they're designed to attack dreadnoughts. They're incredibly powerful, and we'll go over their stats and how we know that in just a moment. Alright, so now we're looking at the Ravenous class. So the first thing that comes up is the 4 disruptor cannons. That is very low in disruptors. It's got a lot of photon torpedoes, but the 4 disruptors is slightly misleading. And let me explain why. So we know that a standard D7 has 4 disruptors. And when we look through the Klingon operational manual, we can learn something about our weapons. So I already have formulas, which I will share with you, and I'll blow this up so we can see it. Alright, so that should look pretty good. So, during the Kirk's era, disruptors are KD8s. They hit for 3,750. They have a volley of 15, so they have a total of 56,250. Now, that's canon. We know exactly what they're doing. But the next time we see disruptors is during the TNG, which is 26,000, fires 20 times, and it's 520,000. Now, going from 56 to this is a huge difference, and so we obviously need to figure out what's going on in here. But what we can learn is there are modifiers of the Klingon weapons, and they double. So that makes it pretty easy. So what we can do is we can take our 3,750 and then times it by 3, which is our modifier. That's the highest one that we see with the battleships. And we get a disruptor of 11,250. So we look at that, I'm like, okay, does that fall in the ballpark of what we should be seeing with ships during this era? Because the most powerful ship that we see is going to be an Excelsior class. So let's look at our Federation weaponry and let's see what we get. So we have Type 7, which is 2,812. And then we have Type 8 phasers. So that ship would have had Type 8 phasers. So if you've seen my old videos, I had to do some corrections which fixed my phaser 8s. They used to be 30,000, which never really made sense, but that's what I had. After the modifiers and fixing it, it now falls in a ballpark that makes a lot more sense. 7,500. So we go back up, and let's look at what we had there. 7,000. So we do see that Klingon weapons do hit harder by a little bit. So this is pretty high, but it's in the ballpark. So most likely, our Ravager is actually hitting for 11,250. Now, obviously, its torpedoes is its main source of defense. So, 325,000 in torpedoes is a lot. Now, and if these are like the Katanga, and they can, fire 3. Then we're getting a huge amount of firepower. We're talking about a devastating amount of firepower. Now, obviously, ships of these time periods don't have enough power to be operating torpedo tubes that much. So what would probably happen is those torpedoes are going to be loaded. They're going to fire the 3, and then they're going to have these other cannons just waiting. As soon as the power gets up, then we launch another 3. They're not going to be able to launch all of them at once. So that's unrealistic. But now at least we have a good understanding of what we're seeing here. And then if you guys are interested, we now know pretty much what the Ravenous is. So there's very little actual data on the Ravenous. So what we did is we took the mass of what we believed this ship to be, and I converted it into my formulas. So one of the things that goes on with these ships and these conversions, which I'll show you, is they don't exactly match up with the little Star Trek book here. So the little, I'll use a bird of prey as a prime example of this as soon as I get it. So you can kind of see, so what we see in Star Trek and the other manuals is that the cannon of the bird of prey's mass is 236,000. Find this page here, which is in this book. So I'm going to go look at what they call a bird of prey scout, which is the K-22. In the manual I have, it says the weight is 47 megatons, which is nowhere close to what it should be. So what I did is I just kind of averaged it out, and then I started taking what we see in here, and I made a formula. I think it's 5.1 is what the difference value was, and so you just times it, and then you're getting your weight. So, and then if you guys are wondering about Klingon ships here, and you want to just kind of, maybe I'll blow this up a little, make it a little bit easier. I don't know how much you guys can see. I don't really need a lot of that data. So, Kirk era. Oh no, the Kirk era is the Scout, 70,500 shields, hull. Right, and then this is the TNG with the newer weaponry, newer shield, same hull value. You can see there's a difference. Klingon ships have a lot of armor, so let's look at the Katanga, because I don't know much about the D7. I'll do a video on it by itself, and then do the conversions. But for right now, I was just using like a standard Katanga. So the Katanga that Kirk was going against is 152,500. Shields are 325. Has a hull of 540, and it has an attack value or shield and defense value 865. So it's pretty good. And its mass is 759,999. So it's pretty close and pretty much there with the Constitution class. It's got heavy armor. So this is the data table, so we'll go ahead and we'll just stop there. So what I did is I took another Klingon battle cruiser, right, and I put that in here. So what we have is a mass of 1,091,400, and then we have crew of 1,070, troops 480, warp 6, and then a maximum of 8. So, big ships in the Kirk era, due to power restraints, their warp speeds because of the armor and weight significantly slowed them down. So, and then these are also on the warp scales during the time period, which I don't know what the conversion between TNG and the Kirk era is, but this isn't warp 6 in our TNG area and warp 8. I don't think it is. It might be, but anyways, that's kind of what we got going on here. I just want to add this little bit to my video so you guys get an understanding. When you see this, like 4 disruptors, though this does, I put these as disruptor cannons is what it stated. like the bird of prey has, but these are probably more along the lines of siege disruptors. But it doesn't specifically say that, and like I said, there's next to no data on the Ravenous at all. It's almost everything is just made up. I don't think there's any actual official stats, but I wanted to do the best I can with using the Klingon conversion operational manual and then using my own formulas, and then we can figure out basically what the ship should have been based on what we know. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll be moving on. Alright, so now we need to talk about Kirk, Admiral Kirk's time period. So, the Ravenous, the L-24 battleships, very, very few of them were ever built because they were built right before the destruction of Praxis. When the destruction of Praxis occurred, it devastated the Klingon Empire's economy, completely collapsed. They couldn't afford their military because it was so large. They began cutting back on everything. They began dismantling the D4s, the T3s, the K15s, D3s. They were all deassembled shortly after this. And what they were focusing on, even the D7s, right, which had been their iconic ship, were all being replaced by the Katangas and the K-22 birds of prey. The reason that they did that is because they could not afford large, massive armies anymore, and so their infrastructure had collapsed. They can't afford to build Ravenous. They don't have the money. So they began scrapping everything they had, and they began building massive amounts of Katangas. And D7s were being retrofitted to Katangas. They're taking that modern technology that they had, and they're doing the best that they could. Now, a Katanga has 6 disruptors instead of 4, and it has 2, I would say, high-quality torpedo launchers. It's still an expensive ship, but it was a ship that was much, much, much more affordable than obviously something like the Ravenous. They knew that from this point on they were not going to be able to do anything against the Federation. That was completely off the table. There's no way that they could keep up with the Federation. And they just declined until the Federation stepped in. When the Klingon Federation Accords happened, Klingons' ability to build ships basically just disappeared. They had a massive army of Katangas, and they had lots of K-22s and other variants of the bird of prey. So the bird of prey was an expensive ship, but they offsetted that by making all their basic, all your old fleet yards, I don't know why I couldn't talk, were now constructing just these basic ships. And so lots of your designs that were out there with the Klingons were basically gone. And that's why you had so many birds of prey. And obviously, once you are building something which used to be incredibly expensive, once you're mass producing it and your infrastructure is set up to build it, that's when the bird of prey came in. Now, it was a really smart move because the bird of prey logistically can do so much compared to these other ships, though it was expensive. Once they've got it to a pretty cheap price to build, they were mass producing this ship. And so the Klingon Empire was able to hold a good sized army, but it was a very small army full of basically scouts and cruisers. So if you've ever wondered why the Katanga became the iconic ship of the Klingon Empire and what happened to everything else, now you have an understanding of the ships, the history, and the understanding of how Klingon tactics work and why they retrofitted their entire fleet this way. I hope you guys have enjoyed the analysis of the Klingon tactics and Klingon Empire. And with that being said, I'm out.
If you like this content, please subscribe and tell your friends. If you're a fan of Star Trek, make a comment. It makes a difference. With that being said, thank you all for watching Trek Wars.